Last week, the Supreme Court delivered landmark decisions in favor of religious liberty, freedom of speech, and equal opportunity for all. Naturally, many on the left responded by attacking not only the decisions themselves, but the legitimacy of the Supreme Court itself. While the left's attacks are clearly born of frustration about the outcomes, comes at a time where there is growing public distrust in our systems and our processes. A recent national survey from Rasmussen Report finds 54% of likely U.S. voters believe that cheating will affect the outcome of the next presidential election. That includes 30% who think it is very likely that that will happen. What happens if the public loses faith in the Supreme Court and our election system? Joining me now to discuss this is Ken Blackwell. He's a senior fellow for human rights and constitutional governance at the Family Research Council. Ken, good to see you today.
Joseph, good to be with you, sir.
Well, to get us started, I want to play a reaction from MSNBC host Joy Reid that's representative of how the left is talking about the Supreme Court these days. Let's play clip 4.
We begin tonight with the Supreme Court, which nowadays is acting more like a super Congress, with last week's rulings on affirmative action and LGBTQ rights, and on everything from voting rights to women's rights, labor policies, and guns. They have acted like unelected politicians and not a court.
Ken Blackwell, is the Supreme Court acting like unelected politicians rather than a court?
No, and I think what she wanted is an activist court that would, in fact, move away from the Constitution, reinterpret the founding principles in such a distorted way that there is no stability. So, Joy Reid is a radical leftist. She, in fact, wants an activist court that would, in fact, remake the United States of America in an image consistent, perhaps, if you look back in history with Mao's China and the old Russia, and that's just what we're up against with this modern day crowd of Marxists.
Now, Ken, it's interesting to hear her say that this is an activist bench, because stereotypically, it's the conservative side that would say, no, there's a real original intent. We need to be faithful to that. And if we want to depart from that, you actually have to legislate, change the law, or amend the Constitution. And it's the left side of the political spectrum that has said, well, the words don't really matter. It's a living, breathing document. Meaning changes over time as the culture changes and our values changes. And it's important that the courts be sensitive to the changes in the culture. And therefore, they've actually been pretty supportive of legislating from the bench. That's how they got abortion rights with Roe versus Wade. That's how they redefined marriage and the Obergefell decision. Why is it that you think now that someone like Joy Reid is saying, well, these shouldn't be activist justices, they shouldn't be legislating from the bench?
Well, she's a reactionary. Not only a Marxist revolutionary, she's a reactionary to the originalism that has been displayed in a lot of the decisions of this court. President Donald Trump gave us 3 justices, Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch, that actually made the court heavy and it's leaning towards originalism, and that's been good. That's been good for America. Joy Reid is the same person who basically thinks that your gender is very liquid, very fluid. You can change it on a whim, and that's the kind of nonsense that she advocates, and I think that we should just say, stop it, Joy, just stop it. The American people are not going to listen to that.
For additional context to this reaction, one of the cases that the Supreme Court decided was the case of 303 Creative. This involved a website designer. Very simply, the Supreme Court said that the government cannot force a website designer to say something they don't believe. Now, that's actually not a new principle in American law, and they reestablished something that has really been the status quo since the Constitution was written. There's been no point in our past where any court said, yeah, as a condition of, well, this is not true of any court. That's an overstatement, but we have not had a general jurisprudential position that the federal government or a state government can force someone to say things they don't believe. And so when the Supreme Court restated that position here, that's what they determined to be activism, I guess?
Well, look, one of the things that the left fails to realize, or perhaps they don't want most Americans or all Americans to realize, that what has really made us different in our 247 years is that we put a premium on the primacy of the individual and the human conscience. And what we're now starting to see from this court that's dominated by originalists is an appreciation for respect of the individual conscience and religious liberty. This is, I think, a signature decision by this majority. And again, I want to go back to say that with the help of a lot of folks, including Tony Perkins and the Family Research Council, speaking into the president's decision-making, President Trump gave us 3 individuals through his appointments, his nominations, that have changed the direction of the court and taken us back to a conservative constitutionalism or originalism. And that's been good because there is a healthy respect of this court of individual liberty, of the separation of powers, and the fact that the family is the incubator of liberty, and God is at the center of the culture of our nation.
I agree with you about the 3 justices that President Trump nominated and put on the bench. I shudder to think what the country would look like had Hillary Clinton won that election and she had filled those vacancies instead. I think for all intents and purposes, the First Amendment, as we have always understood it, would no longer function. And that would be a world that none of us really wants to live in. But Ken Blackwell, I want to pick up on a principle or an argument that you just made there about recognizing the right of the individual rather than groups necessarily. And I think that was a theme in the affirmative action case as well, where the court said that when it comes to college admission, you can't use racism to fight racism. You can't count somebody's skin color against them or for them, even if you have good intentions. Is that a fair restatement of what they did?
Absolutely. And if you go back and you look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a careful reading of it, it will show you that it is implanted in the language that you, in fact, can't discriminate, use discrimination to fight discrimination, and that the essence of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 isn't to lay special treatment on any citizens to the denial of individual or equal protection of other citizens. And so what this court has done is taken us back, I think, to a fundamental principle that puts the primacy of the individual and the centrality of God in the life of this nation.
I think the money quote from the majority opinion in that affirmative action case was that, quote, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it, end quote. And I think that's going to live for a long time. Now, Ken Blackwell, I want to go back to a little bit about the reaction to this, because it has been, we saw Joy Reid's reaction from that, but it's also come from Congress itself. Here's a tweet that Elizabeth Warren sent out on April 24th of this year, so before these decisions, but post Dobbs and all of the other things. And she said, I'll be blunt. Right-wing extremists have hijacked the Supreme Court of the United States. From shredding abortion rights to rigging the rules against workers and consumers, an out-of-touch majority is substituting their own views for the rule of law. Ken Blackwell, what do you think the implications of these kind of attacks from members of the United States Senate against the Supreme Court are?
Well, look, they want to mold the Supreme Court in their image, and they want to move us away from the constitutional principles that has made us the greatest country in the history of the world. One of the things that this court understands is that, the human condition isn't a spectator sport, and our country isn't perfect. But as Lincoln said, it is perfectible, and it's done by individuals, not government. The reality is that a great society is the work of good people doing great things together, not of great governments doing great things. And that's a principle that Elizabeth Warren can't get her mind wrapped around. She is in fact a statist, and it's really reflected in all that she says and does. Joseph, I think we ought to, as a nation, celebrate the intellectuals and scholars who actually were on the front line, like Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, Shelby Steele. These folks, basically understand that what Martin Luther King was talking about was making sure that we lived in a society where everybody's human dignity was respected. He in fact talked about it in saying that what we wanted was respect for one's character, not the celebration of the color of one's skin.
Ken Blackwell, that makes me think of another question, because there seems to be a special kind of animosity on the left reserved for Clarence Thomas. They have a problem with all of the conservative justices, but they've gone after him especially hard, claiming ethics violations. He's done things that essentially every Supreme Court justice has done over the last 20 years, but they want him. Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that he's not just conservative, but that he's a Black conservative, and so that's a special kind of a problem for them?
Yeah, he explodes their mythologies, and that is a real threat to their power base. And look, Clarence is a strong man of a strong character, and look, he is going to do the right thing, and that will just set a lot of liberals and radicals' hair on fire. But so be it.
Yeah. Another subject that you know something about is elections. I mentioned at the top of the segment that 54% of voters, according to a Rasmussen poll, believe that cheating will affect the outcome of the next presidential election. What do you make of that?
Well, look, we have to constantly work to make sure that it is easy to vote, but hard to cheat. And Ken Kukowski and I, over a decade ago, wrote a piece for the Yale Law Review that talked about the development of our voting rights. We said we've spent a lot of time concentrating on voter rights, which has been appropriate, but we actually should deal with the duties of citizenship, which means that we might have to take a little time to make sure that we do those things that people will have confidence that voters are who they claim to be, and that the process is free of corruption, and cheating. And that's what we have to constantly work, making it easy to vote but hard to cheat, looking at ways that we can make our system of voting more transparent, but actually more free of corruption and cheating. And I'll just give you an example. We really can't move to a system where we depend on vote by mail to an extraordinary, heavily weighted sense, because by their own admission, the U.S. Postal Services loses 3% of the mail. If you begin to take a look at how many races for city council, mayor's races, state legislatures, Congress, and the presidency are won within the margins of litigation, you know that we can't afford to move to a system where we're apt to lose 3% of the ballots.
Yeah, that does seem like a problem if you're just accepting the fact that 3% of the vote is somehow going to be lost. Ken Blackwell, perhaps the last question for you in about a minute. We know there were a lot of shenanigans in 2020 around the election. Rules changed, kind of COVID emergency claims. Have things improved since then in a way that should make voters feel better?
Well, it's been uneven. There have been steps taken to make sure that nursing homes are and seniors in nursing homes are protected from abuse. There have been moves to make sure that voters with signature verification processes uh, uh, are voters are who they claim to be. Yes, but there have also been states where there has been a very loosening of some voting processes that makes it imperative that we are very vigilant as we go into this election. Uh, Engagement, using our human agency, engaging, not sitting on the sidelines, not wringing our hands,